Howdy everyone. I always wanted to say that. In this video, we got a couple stories from Texas. So as always, pull up a stump and there's no more to say. Let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. When I was a kid, my dad had this friend from work who was really big on those get-rich-quick schemes. Once he bought what he genuinely believed to be a map fragment to the treasures of the colonial pirate Jean Lafitte. He did his research and became convinced that he'd found a location, a section of the Texas coast. He told my folks and a couple of others that if they'd devote their vacations to helping him look, he'd cut them in. So for the next 3 years, my family vacationed on the Texas Gulf Coast. Everyone else treated it like fun and games, but Adam, the guy who bought that map for God knows how much, was super serious about it. 3 years of hard work with nothing to show for it will make a man do crazy things. In desperation, Adam contacted a medium local to the area. They were told to select 4 people to attend a seance and to bring no children and no animals to her house. My mother and father were, of course, 2 of the people that Adam chose. Later, much later, my father told me that when the old woman started calling up the spirits, he heard every dog in earshot start howling uncontrollably, and the woman started to speak in a man's voice. The supposed spirit said that he'd been killed and cursed to stand watch over the treasure, but his faith as a Christian had rendered the curse powerless, so Lafitte himself was sent back from hell to watch over a treasure that he could no longer use. He said to drive to the coast and he'd send a sign. He also said that when we found the hole, that no man was to go inside without a cross, a Bible, or some form of holy protection. So after this, off we went, driving the section of coast that the medium had confirmed. Just past dusk, we saw what Adam took to be our sign, a copse of trees back from the beach, faintly glowing with St. Elmo's fire. My dad, Adam, and another man headed up to the grove to see what there was to see. I was in the back of our station wagon, playing with some matchbox cars, when my mom called me up to the front to look at the trees. She hugged me up in her lap, and we both sat there in silence, staring at those glowing trees. We heard a faint whispering sound from the back of the car, and when we turned back to look, one of my toy cars was making circles on a TV tray we had in the back. The men eventually came out of the woods, with Adam beaming like a jack-o'-lantern. My dad and the other man looked worried because they knew 3 things. Number 1, the news had said that Hurricane Alicia was due to make landfall sometime that night. 2, St. Elmo's fire meant that bad weather was coming. Bad weather. 3, Adam was crazy enough not to care. While the men argued, the weather started coming in. You could see it out over the water, this angry swirl of grays, blacks, and wisps of white, looking like fading hope. My mother turned on the radio, partly to hear the weather, partly to drown out the argument, I'm sure. Through the window, I could see Adam and the other man getting more and more animated. My father, as always, playing the peacemaker. Eventually, my father and the other man got back in the car. "We're gonna have to drag him out of here," my dad said. The other man said, "We ought to just leave the crazy son of a bitch." My father just looked at him. Outside, Adam's wife was clearly begging him to get back in the car, and Adam was just as clearly refusing. The patter of rain had begun to fall. My father heaved a sigh and got back out of the car. My father was by far the biggest man of the 3, and Adam knew that if my father laid hands on him, it was all over. So Adam pulls his gun. My mother snapped off the radio and bailed out of the car, immediately started trying to interpose himself between Adam and my father, commanding him, something my mother never ever did, to get back in the car. For his part, Adam wasn't pointing the gun at anyone. He wasn't just that far gone yet. but he pulled it out from its holster in the small of his back and just sort of casually held it as he calmly, rationally spouted complete paranoid lunacy. He accused us of trying to talk him out of there so we could all have the treasure for ourselves. He said he heard us talking behind his back. That's when we found out just how much he paid for that scrap of map. $10,000 for a quote authentic piece of a map that didn't have more on it than a suggestion of an X on it. Everyone, his wife included, was begging him to get in the car. It was well past dark at this point and the storm was coming in for real. Adam just stood there, solemnly shaking his head, gun at his side. My father pulled his wife aside and convinced her to get into our car. I understand now that this is all they could really do for him at this point. If they continued down this path, Adam was likely to shoot somebody. So my father said, "Adam, look, we're your friends. We're not trying to screw you out of anything. If we have to leave you here to make you believe that, that's what we're going to do. You've got keys, so just sit here and think it over. Just don't think too long because that storm's going to be here soon." And then we left, and then the storm came. My mom and dad did what they could do to comfort Adam's wife while the man whose name I can't remember just sat in the corner, drank and fumed. There wasn't much sleeping done that night. The storm had blown through by the following morning, and my dad and the other man took his truck full of tools back out to look for Adam, or maybe what was left of him. What they brought back was technically alive, but I've never seen a man look so out of his eyes the way Adam did. I've seen war vets, dudes who have been in the very deepest of shit you can think of, who didn't look as gone as he did. He didn't speak, not to us, not to his girlfriend or wife or anybody. Later I learned that when they found him, he still had the gun in his hand, but it was empty. My father told me he was up in a hole in the hillside, and I thought he was dead until my father grabbed his ankle, and he started shrieking and screaming, pulling the trigger on his empty gun. Once my father talked him down, he said the last thing he'd say for roughly a year. I forgot about the crosses. He did recover enough over the following years to have a sort of life, but after a suicide attempt, his wife had no choice but to have him committed. He died in state care 2 years later, found under his bed, apparently from a heart attack. I still wonder why he screamed when my father grabbed him by the ankle. I wonder what he emptied his gun into. Most of all, I wonder if it found him under that bed. I asked my dad if they ever considered going back to see if there was anything to be found in that grove. My father said, "No, some things are more precious than an old pirate treasure, son." So in 2020, on the 4th of July weekend, I was in Texas, and me and the boys decided to escape the city. We get an Airbnb out in the hill country for a weekend of hedonism and almost blowing our fingers off with fireworks. And I'm just like, yeehaw about the whole thing. The house is way up on this ridge, a bit off the beaten path, but it's a modern home with a decent view, and the seclusion meant we wouldn't have to be bothering any locals. Now, as these parties go, everyone ends up getting way too screwed up, way too early in the night. Half the party is passed out before midnight. What's left of the party moves outside onto the extensive deck that runs around one half of the house. We light up a couple stogies, shoot some Roman candles at each other, and stuff like that. Eventually, my company dwindles down to one mate who I'll call Jack. So we're just chilling on the deck, which faces the wilderness, away from the road. I'm listening to Jack drunkenly ramble through a half-remembered story, and I see this greenish light off in the distance. It shoots up into the sky from behind a hill or something. I hush my mate and point over to the direction where the light was, just in time for us to see another one shoot up. This one seemed to slow down in the air before expanding into an orb a few hundred feet above the hills, and then slowly fading. "Sick fireworks, dude," I chuckled, and Jack agreed. We sat there for a few minutes watching as more of these lights appear and disappear before I realized that they weren't making any noise, even though we'd definitely be close enough to hear them if they were fireworks. I remembered that there was a footpath behind the garage that led out along the ridgeline the house was set on, and I suggested that we should try to get closer to the lights for a better view. In retrospect, this was an incredibly stupid idea, but I digress. We finished the stogie that we were working on and headed off into the night. Luckily, the ridgeline, and therefore the footpath that we were on, curved towards the origin of the lights. Also, luckily, we didn't get lost and killed by wildlife. It probably helped that we could follow the light show. Eventually, we stumbled right up to the edge of a valley or something, basically standing right on the crest, staring down at where those lights were coming from. They definitely were not fireworks. The valley was dark. There was a full moon, but that only let us see our immediate area and the outline of the hills. On the valley floor were a scattered bunch of green orbs, varied sizes and brightness. Periodically, one would grow in intensity and bud off like cells splitting. Then it would offshoot into the sky with a shriek, and as we saw it before, it would hang in the air for a moment and then expand to a large orb, and then fade out. The orbs on the ground would shrink but not disappear, and since we were this close, I could hear that they did indeed make a sound. It was like a high-pitched humming whenever the lights would shoot upwards, but the orbs on the ground were silent. We were speechless. We quietly cleared a spot on the ground and sat watching the show for hours. I literally couldn't take my eyes off of it, whatever was happening. Eventually, the orbs in the valley stopped shooting off lights. Shortly thereafter, the sky began turning blue. The orbs got dimmer as the sky brightened, until I could see the valley floor, and the orbs simply weren't there anymore. I finally let my eyes wander to find that at some point Jack had fallen asleep or passed out or whatever, so I woke him up and he was really confused and mumbling, and then he jumped to his feet and asked where we were. I said, "I don't know, dude, we came out here to watch the lights." "What lights, bro?" We just stared at each other, confused for a minute, until he waved it all off and looked around for the house. As recently as a month ago, Jack will still act confused and steer away from the conversation if I try to mention the lights that we saw that night. So, let me know what you thought of those stories down in the comments. And as always, I'm always open to hear some of your stories. I had a couple sent to me this week that were really good, and I'm finally going to get around to putting the viewer stories in a video. I'm not putting it off, it's just how things go, but they are going to get into a video, I promise, Anyways, yeah, let me know what you thought of the stories, and there's links to support the channel in the description if you want to do it in a different way. And yeah, thank you for watching, and thank you for pulling up a stump, and I shall see you in the next one.